Hello, there have been a flurry of news this week. I mean, it has just been exploding. So I thought maybe I should save myself the trouble of not talking about all of these things and the coming week's report that I usually make at the weekend, because then it will feel like I would have too much to talk about, because I feel like, I want to try and share this to you. But so I thought I would make myself the trouble of talking about it right now instead. So let's start with the church attack that was in Tennessee, America. There was a 25-year-old Sudanese man. He's from a country, of course, that's Sudan. And that country contains 97% Muslim. And of course, this religion does not bode well for Westerners. And this Tennessee church was mostly white people. It was quite a heavily white neighborhood. This man had been cited before in the church, but it was quite some time ago, but he obviously knew the demographics. And if you watch on his social page, like Facebook and stuff like that, he was very against the white privilege types of folks. He was very anti-white, the rhetoric like white people are evil, white people are racist, white people are the ones bringing war to the rest of the world, etc. Whites are the ones stealing from the blacks, and all of these rhetorics. So he was buying totally into this identity politics. I think he was even a political activist, and well, I guess you could call this extreme activism, but I would call this terrorism and extreme hatred. But of course, this won't be called a hate crime or anything like that, like the other would label it. I would not call it a hate crime either. I would just say it's a crime, because in general, crimes are hateful. But this is pure terrorism, because obviously, if he's an activist and all of these other stuff, he's obviously trying to incite some form of terror into people and try to change the coercion of political debate. One woman died in the attack. He shot her and he turned her around even and shot her again. 6 other people were injured. And one brave church usher actually attacked and confronted this man. In the struggle that ensued, the man shot himself. It's unclear whether he did so purposefully or whether it was from the actual fight. So this man who actually tried to stop the usher, he was considered a hero, because maybe if he wouldn't have done that intervention right there, this could have gone far worse and more than just this woman who sadly died, Mary Smith, I think she was named. More victims could have been from this attack. But then a gun owner who had a legal firearm in his car, he went to his car and got his firearm and held the Sudanese in place until police could come and get him. So now this is under federal investigation, and let's hope this will get the media's attention. I mean, not just for today, but for a long period forward, because people will just forget about this and move on. Lots of other people have said this, but this is going to be so true, and you're just going to be labeling it, oh, it was a tragedy, let's move on. Because whenever it's Christians and whites, people can just move on with their lives, right? It's no big if it's white Christians that dies, but if it's Muslims that's being killed or black people or whatever, then they're going to make it from news to news coverage, every newspaper, etc. It's just so typical. I mean, we all know of this double standard, so no point of talking about it really. But moving on to a more perhaps brighter sort of news, depending on what you think. Catalonia is really trying hard to declare their independence. They're trying to move forward with a referendum to declare themselves independent. If you don't know what Catalonia is, I covered this in my Swedish video that I did about borders and Europe's future. But regardless, if you haven't seen that or don't know Swedish, I will try to give you a brief explanation. It's the northeastern part of Spain. It's where Barcelona is, and basically they're quite a wealthy bunch of people. They have lots of industry, and they're quite a nice part of Spain. They have their own culture, etc. And they want to break free, they want to be independent. But this have left great anger to the Spanish government, of course, because of course they don't want to lose one of their most important parts of the country, and they're not really keen on letting these people go. So they have arrested Catalonian officials, which have sparked anger within the Catalonian people and have also sparked broader attention across the continent. And of course, not many globalists would support this, because from my understanding, Catalonia also wants to break free from the European Union. Though this is not their primary concern, from what I've heard and what's seen. I haven't heard from too many Catalonians, but from different reporters. I think I watched like one person that lives in Catalonia. But they would argue that this is about economics, that it is about not wanting to have the Spanish government interfere with them, and partly perhaps with the Brussels, that they don't want to be dictated with the European Union being the single market to be forced to take in immigrants. But some others would disagree with that, but who knows, perhaps they're globalists, perhaps they're from the European Union. I don't really know exactly where everyone came from, but you probably know that the Spanish government are more tilted towards being in support of the globalists, as though I don't personally know too much about the Spanish politics overall. To the rhetoric they had, it seemed like that. But from another reporter that I listened to, or perhaps just a political analyst, she thought that the Catalonians were the actual ones supporting globalism. You might think like that, because they would try to disband and try to cause more division. But it seems to me that there are in solidarity. For example, they had arguments like, oh well, isn't the cravings for more multiculturalism, isn't that why they're leaving? And then the minister says, well, no, we have lots of diversity in Spain. We have 5 different languages. This is, of course, not just economics, it's also cultural, as Catalonians have their own language, they have their own flag. And even FC Barcelona denounced the actions of the Spanish government and said they would support Catalonia no matter what they would choose, whether they would use this referendum to exit or to stay. But indeed, it's very authoritarian to arrest officials because they try to prepare for a referendum, and it's very undemocratic. And hopefully media coverage will be fair and not biased towards them staying or leaving. I mean, it should be equal. The media coverage should try to show both sides of the situation. But it seems that the Catalonians doesn't have too much widespread support, and they haven't been in too many different affairs with other world leaders in Europe, etc. So it will be interesting to see how they would proceed forward. But I, for sure, don't think that it would be a devastating thing for them. I mean, they seem to be capable of taking care of themselves. They have their own police force, but they don't have a military. And I think that's fundamental for a state to declare themselves independent. But I guess they could change that in time, but still it seems to be not working. But who knows, perhaps Spain could enforce martial law, or perhaps that would seem too much undemocratic. Because from my understanding, having a referendum of independence is not illegal, but it is being considered by many that it's not appropriate. Though Catalonia seems to have a very different ideology about that, because they're more in solidarity and they don't want diversity. I don't think they want this multicultural. I think they want Catalonia. I think that's why they're calling out for the referendum. But some other people would say that it's opportunists trying to grab power and trying to get rich themselves, which I think probably most of these causes are true. But I also heard that a huge demographic wanting for this change, pushing for this change to get the referendum pushed out and to become independent is actually by the younger generations, while the older generations are more convinced to stay. So we'll see how that will turn out. Speaking of which, Scotland also wanted independence, but well, I don't know how well that is gonna go because they disagreed with a democratic vote. When people vote to use the Brexit, they wanted to leave the European Union. And then the globalists within the Scottish party wanted to call for, well, let's exit Britain and still stay in the European Union. So they're trying desperately to stay in their globalist system. However, I don't know how many people in Scotland voted for the Brexit, but I think if most of the people voted for Brexit in Scotland, then I think Scotland will stay. But I don't think the referendum in Scotland is an active thing. I think it's something that I have been discussing, but I don't think it's something they necessarily want to push out right now. Also, another big thing, Kurdistan. You know, the Kurds in Turkey, they want to call for a referendum to leave Turkey. And Erdogan, you know, the crazy guy that wants his Ottoman Empire, he earlier said that he was only against the PPK, the terrorist group within the Kurds, while some does not see them as terrorists. I don't know this story to the full extent, so I can't comment on that completely. He earlier said that he was only against the PPK, but now it seems that he's really just against the Kurds overall, which seemed to be the case when he arrested the Kurdish party leader before, and I think he was sentenced to jail unless something was happening in his trial. I don't really know his fate, but he's most likely in prison with the current administration of Erdogan, who has been known to arrest lawyers and lots of different workers, military. They have even a coup against Erdogan because of his strife towards this Ottoman Empire, his dictatorship. And he even tried to bring back the death penalty. Well, this man is doing a lot of things. He even extended his time as president, or whatever you're supposed to call it, in Turkey to 2029. 2029, he will be so old by then. I mean, it's 3 + 9 years. Wow, it's like 12 years left of his presidency. And by then, he probably could extend it even further should he choose to. But the Kurds are heavily backed by Europeans all over, it seems. And the European Union leaders are going to come into these discussions and help negotiate. So we'll see how that will go. I don't know the political agendas behind this, but there you go. That's happening in Kurdistan. The Kurds are trying to become independent from the Turks, who literally have been persecuting them. And we'll see how this will end. And we'll see if they will have some freedom. And we'll see if Erdogan will leave them alone or if he will hound them. And also, Baghdad was not too pleased to hear this either. And they also had a Kurdish minority. But since the escalation, since the wars, these tensions between the groups have increased as Sunni Muslims have been more radicalized, and with ISIS and everything, the problems for the minority groups in these countries have just been increasing tremendously. With all this declaration of independence, sometimes it's perhaps good thing. I mean, if you look at a country like America or Russia, they're very big countries. I mean, I don't think having a country that's widespread all across the globe is necessarily a good thing. I mean, perhaps geopolitically and everything, but I think there's so many different people, and I think they deserve their own nations. I don't think people should be forced into empires. I don't think empires are a good thing. I'm anti-globalist, which means I don't like when people are gonna force different cultures to coexist, because that does not simply work too well. And well, as we have imported lots of Muslims, it simply destroys our infrastructures, and we see the results of that. More crimes and more problems than we could ever anticipate, and it's just never gonna end. But at the same time, I do feel like countries that have history with different places, that have attachments like spiritual and historical, that sometimes it's just bad with people trying to split, and it could also cause instability in the country, in the regions, etc. But for example, the Kurds, well, they really need their own country, because otherwise they're gonna just get wiped off. If you look at Turkey's history, they're quite a genocidal bunch. They're not afraid. They were invading Albania. They were invading, entire Europe, like Eastern Europe. They even conquered Greece. Greece got their independence from the Ottoman Empire. And look what happened to Albania and Bosnia. They're Muslim now because the Ottoman ultimately forced them to convert and etc. And now they're Muslim extremists in those countries, and they plot to commit genocides upon their own brothers and sisters because they are so blinded by this evil ideology. And this is white people we're talking about. We're not talking about blacks or super Arabs in Saudi Arabia or anything. It's white people. And same in Chechnya. I mean, it's just wars pushing, and then the Muslims conquers, and they pour in immigrants, and they from within try to convert the country to Muslim. And just look at the old Slavic empire with Vladimir the Impaler. I mean, it was just insane, that war, because he defiled the Ottoman supremacy over that region. And of course, the Syrian genocide they committed, they sent out an army, and I don't remember the numbers, but I think it was like 400,000 Syrians that got killed by the Ottoman Empire. But as you can see, so perhaps it's a good thing they split from that country. And in Catalonia, I don't know too much of their history. It said that they have their own language, they have their own history separate from Spain's, so perhaps they're the servant of one. They seem to be in big solidarity, and I think that's a big thing that should be a cause for independence. However, I don't know, it's like sometimes in a country you can have subcultures, like you have a main culture, like in America, for example. They have their American culture. People can say, oh, well, it's built on multiculturalism. No, it's Americana. They have their empire. It's technically an empire. Yes, it's democratic. And they still have the same sort of goal. They have the same sort of aspirations in the country of peace and prosperity and freedom, all of these things. They live under the same constitution. They have gained independent powers in Catalonia, but how much they differ from the Spanish mainland people, I don't know. But for example, they might just be so desperate to leave the European Union, that's why they're committing to this. But in this instance, maybe it would just be better for them to negotiate with Spain if that would be the case. Like, we don't want immigrants here, if that's the issue. Moving on to Pakistan, there was some very interesting interviews Tommy Robinson had on the Rebel, where he interviewed people from Pakistan, or should I say Baluchistan, I think it was called. I could pronounce it wrong. It's basically a place that I think existed before Pakistan was formed, and ever since its formation they have been really troubled by the Pakistani government. Not Alkaida and those people, because when they, in the interview, when they ask people, which people are actually bothering, the terrorists or who? And they said Pakistan, because they know it's the Pakistani government that does this. They are the ones basically blackmailing America, because America is paying them to fight terrorism and etc. But the Pakistani government uses some of this to fight terrorism because that's what the money is for. But they also use it to attack the Baluchistan. These people are actually democratic. I don't think the majority, in this interview, it didn't sound like they were majority Muslims, though Muslims live there because, well, if you know the history of Pakistan, then you know that there's a lot of Muslims living in that country because of troubles they had in India and of course surrounding countries. But these people are basically suffering from genocide. People are trying to wipe them off the map. And they live in the most resource-rich place in the entirety of Pakistan. Yet their people are not getting the resources from their government to have clean water, proper food, etc. And the starvation in India, I mean, I know this is Pakistan, but if you know the history, it's quite related. They have huge dehydration because they have, solid ground, with engineering and stuff like that, where there used to be forests and stuff like that, and it's now just deserts, and the dehydration is extreme, and people are dying because of lack of water by dehydration, and people committing suicides in huge numbers in India. This is horrible. I mean, it's like every day multiple bodies floating in the rivers. Of course, the propaganda from the Indian government says there's no such thing, there's no dead people, even though they can pile up 5 dead people next to the bridge. And then the government is going to say, no, there's no dead people, and the police have removed the bodies. So no media could photo them, and etc. So people are actually making a living out of fishing dead corpses out of the water and sell it to relatives. So it's really horrible what's going on in India. But never mind that, let's go back to Pakistan. And these Baluchis, they are suffering greatly, both economically and militarily, because they're getting attacked, they're getting shot. I mean, it's that bad, from what they said in the interviews. And it's really shocking. I was unaware of this, but this is not surprising because the globalists only want to talk about genocides in different areas where there are not Muslim majorities. They always try to say it's not Muslims, and we know what happens. And we know that Pakistan is a country that sends a lot of refugees here, even though they are not in a big great war or anything. And these people comes here and commits horrendous atrocities, acid attacks, public defecation. Not that it's the worst thing in the world, but still it's pretty despicable. When you bring people from these cultures that's underdeveloped and doesn't have the same views, and rape boys and young girls, and rape our women because they think they're whores. It's not good traits to adopt from a different country, no matter how much you like diversity and different people. It works in a Harry Potter book, not in real life. And that's what globalism does. It doesn't want multi-ethnicity. It doesn't want a diversity throughout the world. They want a single thing in everything. One world religion, one world speech, one world school system, etc. Everything, one mono race. Everything is mono. It's all solo. All subculture are just gonna disappear. It would cease to exist. But that's something people don't realize. And all this talks about multi-ethnicity, multicultural, it's just bullshit. It's identity politics to separate us, to split us. It's to divide and conquer. It's nothing more than that. But sadly, people are buying into this, and these people in Baluchistan, or Baluchistan, I'm mixing Catalonia and Baluchistan, these people are being unheard of. People don't even know they exist, and they are fighting year after year. And these interviews took place in Geneva, and one of them was the son of one political leader, president of Baluchistan, who was murdered. And there's lots of kidnappings even. They're being kidnapped for just expressing the political views. One even criticized that people were disappearing. Like lots of political people, lots of family members of these political people. and he disappeared. And I think he survived to tell the tale even, according to him. I mean, it could be a falsification, you never know. But still, I think when so many people, so many faces are missing, I mean, they have a website where they say, have you seen any of these people? These people are missing. I think people, you should just open their eyes. Like, there's really things that our media are so biased against that they refuse to cover. You won't hear about this unless someone like Tommy Robinson starts to talk about this, and then perhaps even more will echo this, and perhaps it will become so prominent that the mainstream media has to cover this. Like fluorides, the mainstream media have now been forced to admit that fluorides are being put in the water and it is hurting us. And that's extremely progressive with the media to actually admit this heinous crime committed by the globalists, pouring these chemicals into our waters so we're getting poisoned. I uploaded a separate video on that where some experts talked about it, and I thought, it's an interesting thing to share. So check that out. And also, it's sort of a backstab to America that not only are these Pakistani government helping fund terrorists, they actually help fund the terrorists. And so the Americans, you guys try to help your country, stabilize your country, you're getting fundings from us. And so in doing this, they completely betray them because they help the very threats they're supposed to oppose, and also uses the opportunity of this money to fund their actions against the Baluchistans. Baluchistans, I don't really remember what they're being called now, sorry. And not only this, they are also working hand in hand with China because they're both great enemies of India. And if you look at the geopolitical situation, you have China across the mountains, northeast of India, and then you have these Muslims in Pakistani government that wants to have war with India. They want to conquer India, basically. And they have been given nukes by China, so it's very troubling. Basically, what everyone wants is the opportunity to declare war, except I don't think India wants to declare war against China, because China would roll over India quite heavily, even though India also have nukes. But I don't think India would stand a chance against China, even though they have huge mountains in between them. But it seems like with the report I did earlier of the mountainous regions China is getting a hold of, the Burma situation, Indians are losing their foothold there, and the Chinese are actually preparing themselves to have a advantage in case a war would erupt. And the Pakistanis are, of course, to the west. Who knows, perhaps they are the religion of peace. Perhaps I misinterpret their actions completely. But I don't think, according to their history, that they actually want peace. I think they want to convert India to Muslim from Hindu or whatever religions they may also have in that country. Because from what I remember, India is probably the most rich in religions because it's the birthplace of so many religions. But I think Hindu is their main religion. But as you can probably imagine with what I just said, is that America is getting heavily betrayed by Pakistan as they are giving money to terrorists and really goes against all they promised to do and uses it for other purposes, just so they can get money from America, because America keeps giving them money. That's the big wrong part they do in the first place. I mean, it's almost as bad as the Iran deal, where America gave Iran $800 million not to produce nuclear weapons. But, well, I think they went ahead to proceed towards building more missiles and such. So I don't think it was a very successful deal, and I think that deal was made by Obama's administration, if I recall correctly in history and politics here. But then again, who knows how long this Pakistan deal or whatever it is have been going on, that they have been getting fundings from the US. But perhaps that is in order to help the neighboring country of Afghanistan to help fight the terrorist Alkaida group there. Or there's so many Muslim terrorist groups, it's hard to keep track of. As you probably remember, they invaded Afghanistan in the past. But moving... okay, what is it? All right. Oh, we have a special report by me.
It's working. All right. How you see here, I'm sitting here hidden from the North Korean threats of nuclear fallout war and etc. And Rocket Man, recently named by Trump in his UN address, has responded, and he said that this will be met severely and Donald Trump is not suitable to be president of the United States of America, and other things like the Democrats have been constantly pouring out for the last 8 months. And of course, Trump have also made more severe actions towards Kim Jong-un. He had set a... I had 2 parasites walking on me. I had to remove them. Now, back to the news. Instead of watching on parasites walking on me. Trump responded severely as well. He set sanctions to block all commerce connections to North Korea. No business, no banks. And those banks goes to all of US allies. And another parasite is walking on me. Damn it! There's so much of them this year. And even China is going to cut the support of banks for North Korea, so they can't take loans. You know, they take loans as, you know, private people, as country, etc. And those goes to funding to build nukes and stuff. So hopefully they're gonna cut North Korea off economically as well in business, trade, etc. So they will be completely cut off. And this is pretty much the last step they can actually take to cut off North Korea from their threats, because they're constantly threatening people, and this cannot be tolerated. And I guess we can only wait and see what's gonna happen next. And of course, I think it was on MSNBC or CNN, I don't remember now, but he was having an imaginary interview with the president or regime leader of whatever he is being called in North Korea, or Rocket Man, perhaps it's a more suitable name. But anyways, he had an imaginary interview, as you can probably imagine. It had imaginary results, because it was completely made up that he had an actual interview with the communist leader of North Korea. I mean, imaginary interview, that's pretty next level, right? Anyways, back to you, myself.
Alright, thank you, me. So that was a report by me. And as you probably noticed, this Kim Jong-un, he's threatening back that Trump should pay dearly for his remarks, the Rocket Man, right? And it's really getting out of hand, this situation. It sounds that one way or another there will become a war. I mean, sooner or later either America will do a preemptive strike, but I don't really think they want to do that, because then China will jump in. But if they wait too long, perhaps Kim Jong-un, or whatever he's called, is gonna actually... Rocket Man, it's a pretty good name actually, quite catchy. He might eventually just send a nuke to South Korea or something. You never know. You never know. And then lots of lives will be lost. But I don't think this conflict can be solved without lots of innocents of deaths. But you can always hope that America could launch some sort of EMP engagement and try to stop the North Koreans from communicating and launching missiles in the first place. But I don't know how effective their EMP systems capabilities are. But it is also said that America have lots of unverified weapons at their disposal that could perhaps be very useful in a conflict with North Korea. But regardless, I really hope they are amping up this anti-missile systems in North Korea, or I mean in South Korea and Japan, to protect them from attacks by Kim On-yin, or Rocket Man. And also, I heard that Kim On-yin said that they are at war with America already, and they are going to launch missile, that it's imminent. It sounds crazy. I don't know what's going on anymore. Eventually something is gonna get loose, because it sounds like Trump is getting more and more aggressive with his point outs to North Korea that they have to get serious and have to stop these threats. Because recently it was they will unleash fire and fury and lots of these things, and North Korea keeps threatening even American sovereignty. It's just ludicrous. This situation won't end well. But you can always try and pray, because I think lots of prayers will be needed. But personally, I just wish Kim On-yin, or Rocket Man, whatever he wishes to be called. I don't think he wishes to be called Rocket Man, but you get my point. This guy that leads to North Korea will actually just stop threatening, bombing people, but and launching missiles right next to Japan and etc. I mean, they should be able to launch and test their missiles, but not perhaps directly towards Japan. That seems to me to be ludicrous. And of course, since he's such an unstable leader, I would not want to see nuclear capabilities in his hands, which they do possess. And if they have thermonuclear weapons, I would be even much more concerned, especially as they develop ICBMs that could hit America, and they recently had some extremely successful tests according to them and America. But of course, if you listen to Liberty Report, they would say weapons manufacturers are gaining out of this, like they would say in any conflict. But I think this is an inevitable conflict. I mean, you will either disarm these people or you will get bombed by them. I think it's an ultimatum, basically. I don't think there's a middle ground to this. But who knows? Perhaps this situation have been overworked up. And, well, the North Korean had also some remarks at the UN speech. Could be interesting to listen to.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Ri Yong-ho, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Before going into the main points in my debate, I feel forced to make comments on the speech uttered 4 days ago by someone called the US President that rendered this sacred UN arena tainted. Since Trump uttered such reckless and violent words provoking the supreme dignity of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea at this very platform, I think it is fair enough for me to make a response in the corresponding tone. The absurd reality that a person like Trump, a mentally deranged person full of megalomania and complacence, the person who is chastised even by American people as Commander-in-Grief, Lion King, President Evil, is holding the seat of the US President, and the dangerous reality that the gambler who grew old using threats, frauds, and all other schemes to acquire a patch of land holds the nuclear button. These are what constitute the gravest threat to the international peace and security today. He tried to insult the supreme dignity of my country by referring it to a rocket. By doing so, however, he committed an irreversible mistake of making our rockets visit to the entire US mainland inevitable all the more. The respected supreme leader of the DPRK, Comrade Kim Jong-un, stated, "As a man representing the DPRK and on behalf of the dignity and honor of my state and people and on my own, I will make the man holding the prerogative of the supreme command in the US pay dearly for his speech calling for totally destroying the DPRK. The most rampant violation of international justice can be seen on the Korean Peninsula. Unprecedented acts of injustice, such as imposing harsh sanctions on a victim for the reason that the victim choose to stand up to the offender, are openly committed in the name of the UN. The United States is the country that first produced nuclear weapons and the only country that actually used it, massacring hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. It is the US that threatened to use nuclear weapon against the DPRK during the Korean War in 1950s and first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Korean Peninsula after the war. The US started large-scale joint military exercises against the DPRK during the Cold War period and further increased their scope and aggressive nature after the Cold War, staging the exercises several times a year by mobilizing more of nuclear strategic assets. What else could be a bigger threat than the violent remarks such as pouring fire and fury, total destruction, coming from the top authority of the world's biggest nuclear power? The very reason the DPRK had to possess nuclear weapons is because of the US, and it had to strengthen and develop its nuclear force onto the current level to cope with the US. The US hostile policy and nuclear threats have continued over 70 years, and these have led the situation on the Korean Peninsula to a touch-and-go point. But in the United Nations, unjustifiable resolutions which illegalize justice as injustice are randomly adopted due to the high-handedness of the US. The respected Supreme Leader, Comrade Kim Jong-un, chairman of the State Affairs Commission of the DPRK, said, "International justice is never achieved by itself. It can only be achieved when the anti-imperialist independent countries are strong enough. Unless true international justice is realized, the only valid philosophical principle is that force must be dealt with force and nuclear weapons of tyranny must be dealt with nuclear hammer of justice. The possession of nuclear deterrence by the DPRK is a righteous self-defensive measure taken as an ultimate option pursuant to this principle. Distinguished delegates of all countries attending this session are aware of the fact that the DPRK, unlike other nuclear weapon states, made public every time to the world the test process and its result in all stages of the development and advancement of its nuclear force. Since the war deterrent for safeguarding peace and security of the Korean Peninsula and the region is strengthened enough, the United States and its followers must now think twice before launching military provocation against the DPRK. Although they talk about fire and fury, total destruction and whatever, every time they have to add various conditions such as hopefully this will not be necessary, that is not our first option, and so on. The Security Council fabricated illegal and double standard resolutions which only prohibit the satellite launch of the DPRK in violation of the international law prescribing peaceful use of outer space as a sovereign right of every state and without taking any issue with all other satellite launching countries. Second, the Security Council cooked up illegal and double standard resolutions which arbitrarily prohibit only the nuclear tests of the DPRK although nuclear test strictly belongs to the sovereignty of every state, since the international law on prohibition of nuclear test has not yet entered into force. And there are countries that conducted many more nuclear tests. Third, the Security Council condemned the development of nuclear weapons by the DPRK as a threat to international peace and security, and on that basis fabricated illegal and double standard resolutions in contravention of Article 51 of the UN Charter, which recognizes the right to self-defense of every state, and without calling into question the other countries that kept on developing latest nuclear weapons of various kinds. The international agreement on nuclear non-proliferation was possible because the nuclear weapon states had made the promise not to threaten non-nuclear weapon states with the nuclear weapons. Article 10 of the NPT stipulates that each party shall have the right to withdraw from the treaty if it decides that its supreme interests have been jeopardized. This article recognizes that the supreme interests of states are above the nuclear non-proliferation. After all, the US itself impeded the international efforts for nuclear non-proliferation by not giving up the nuclear threat against the DPRK, but rather compelling the latter to possess nuclear weapons. This eloquently shows that the anti-DPRK resolutions are not based on any established principles and that they are nothing less than the products of undemocratic old practices of the Security Council and the conspiracy and collusion of the forces obsessed only in their vested interests. The US claims that the DPRK's possession of H-bomb and ICBM constitutes a global threat, even at the UN arena. But such claim is a big lie, which is just tantamount to the notorious big lie faked up by the US in 2003 about the existence in Iraq of weapons of mass destruction in order to invade that country. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea is a responsible nuclear weapon state. We will take preventative measures by merciless preemptive action in case the US and its vessel forces show any sign of conducting a kind of decapitating operation on our headquarters or military attack against our country. However, we do not have any intention at all to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against the countries that do not join in the US military actions against the DPRK. The DPRK government made a request to the UN Secretariat that a forum of international law experts be organized to assess legal grounds and lawfulness of the UNSC resolutions, but we have not heard anything from the Secretariat for 9 months already. Same is true of the fact that the DPRK made repeated requests to the United Nations Security Council to discuss the serious threat to the international peace and security posed by the aggressive and provocative US-South Korea large-scale joint military exercises, but these requests were never put on the UNSC agenda, rather turned down every time. The UN Charter stipulates that the members of the United Nations accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. If the resolutions on the DPRK adopted at the Security Council are truly lawful and fair, there will be no need that all US ambassadors abroad and even the President and the State Secretary turn out to coerce other countries into implementing the resolutions. Furthermore, there will be no need for the US to bring its stooges like South Korea and Japan into this. Mr. President, my delegation takes this opportunity to extend strong support to and solidarity with the Cuban government and people who are fighting to defend national sovereignty and realize international justice against the high-handedness, arbitrariness, and unilateral embargo of the US. We also express strong support to and solidarity with the government and people of Venezuela who are fighting to defend the national sovereignty and the cause of socialism. The unjust and contemptible acts such as turning a blind eye to the heinous acts of Israel while condemning in every manner only the Syrian government fighting to protect its national sovereignty and security, should not be tolerated any longer. The DPRK government will certainly defend peace and security of the country with its powerful nuclear deterrence, and also contribute to safeguarding world peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Me did some interesting remark about some imaginary interview with the mighty leader of North Korea. That could be interesting to listen to.
I'm sometimes asked what world figure I would most want to interview. Well, for me, the answer is obvious: Kim Jong-un. The general impression around the world continues to be that the North Korean leader is crazy, provocative, and unpredictable. But I wonder, he might well be strategic, smart, and utterly rational. Since I'm unlikely to get that interview, I've decided to imagine it instead. I would first ask, Marshal Kim, why do you keep building and testing nuclear weapons, even though they result in massive, crippling economic sanctions for your country? I imagine he might answer like this: my nation faces a fundamental challenge: survival. The regime and I personally are more threatened than ever before. My forefathers had it easy. The great leader, my grandfather, ruled with the support of the world's other superpower, the Soviet Union, as well as our gigantic neighbor, China. My father, dear leader, as we called him, still had Beijing's help for the most part. But today, the sole superpower, the United States, has made it clear that it seeks regime change in my country. Yet we have survived with our ideology and system intact. How? Because we have built a protection for ourselves in the form of nuclear weapons. So I might follow up with Kim. But China still provides you with crucial supplies of food and fuel. Don't you see them as an ally? What would he say? Well, maybe he would say, China is ruthlessly pragmatic. It supports us for its own selfish interests. It doesn't want millions of refugees or a unified Korea on its border, one that would be a larger version of what South Korea is now, with American troops and a treaty alliance with Washington. But I believe that China no longer considers us an ally. After all, it's voted to sanction us in the United Nations Security Council time and again. The current president, Xi Jinping, cultivates close relations with South Korea. At the grand celebrations in Beijing 2 years ago, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, he placed the president of Russia and the president of South Korea at his side. In North Korea, as you know, we pay a lot of attention to ceremonies and what they signal. And then I would wonder, so will you come to the negotiating table? Will you agree to denuclearization in return for the lifting of sanctions? Kim's answer, in my imagination, would go like this: yes and no. Yes, we will come to the table, but we will never give up our arsenal. We're not stupid. It's all that's keeping us alive. Look at Saddam Hussein. And we never forget that North Korea was named as part of the axis of evil 1 year before the United States invaded Iraq. Look at what happened to Gaddafi in Libya after he agreed to give up his nuclear weapons program. Look at what's happening to Iran right now. After Washington signed a deal and the Iranians have been certified to be adhering to it, President Trump now says, well, he might tear it up anyway. Do you think we would be stupid enough to believe American promises after all this? We are now a nuclear power. That is non-negotiable. But we're willing to talk about limits, test bans, freezes. We would need to be given something in return, not just money. We need security in the form of diplomatic recognition by Washington and guarantees of non-aggression from China, Japan, and the US. Finally, I would say to Kim, many Americans worry that you will soon have the capacity and the intention to launch missiles at the US. His response might well be, we will have the capacity, and it serves my purposes to keep you off guard. But why would I strike America and invite a retaliatory counterstrike that would put an end to my regime? Keep in mind the whole point of this, my entire strategy, all our efforts and the hardships we have borne are to ensure that my regime and I personally survive. Why would I risk that? If you look at how I have stayed in power, you know I believe in assassinations, not suicide. For more, go to cnn.com/Fareed and read my Washington Post column this week.
I mean, imaginary interview, come on! I have good imagination, but I'm not that sinister to make up a story like that. I mean, come on! American media is a really humor center. I mean, you can get a lot of laughs, but still, at the same time, it's horrific. I mean, seriously, imaginary interviews. Anyways, I think that was most of it. Probably something that I've missed because, as you probably noticed, the world is crazy. There's always things going on. And if you have listened to this full video and you probably have heard something that you were completely unaware of in this video. Perhaps you're very active and are aware of all of these things, but still, we have covered a little bit everywhere in the world. We have talked a little bit about Africa, Sudan. We've talked about America, the shooting, the Europe, the independence referendums, and another tragic fact about Turkey. They are in NATO, so I really think they should be kicked out of NATO, considering they're not really compatible with our countries, and they have even called out for holy war against Europe. Like, what the hell? And we are allied with that country, or at least the NATO countries are, because Sweden are not for the moment and hopefully will not be, but the globalists wants to push us into that, and I think that will be a huge mistake. And we have also covered in Pakistan, India, and a little bit here and there. Not Australia, but they're not really needed. Sorry, I guess the cruel joke. Australia rocks. They have basically the best English accent in the world. I'll give you that. But regardless, I think it's just fun to point out this news. Perhaps I went a little bit too far in depth than what I had originally planned for this video, but I just think it's fun to actually talk about these things, and perhaps I can come up with some things that you have not heard. That's my main intent, to bring up taboos, to bring up unspoken news, things that aren't as much highlighted, and different ways of viewing upon things, and of course anti-globalist things, because that's what I stand for. I stand for nationalism, I stand for sovereign states, I stand for people's independence, and as well freedom and justice, blah blah blah, and all those things that involves in nationalism. That does not mean racism and all those things. It means true diversity, people that actually care about ethnic differences and cares about cultural differences and does not believe that everything can be mixed. Because we do know the results. It will turn into a technocratic empire, dictatorship, totalitarian 1984 dystopia that will completely consume and destroy the very fabric of our free societies that exist all throughout the world. And hopefully, if you're watching this video, you have some freedom and liberty to watch other countries' videos, etc. But remember, there are countries like North Korea where you have no privilege of internet at all. Only the government's propaganda. And I think that country has succeeded to come as close to 1984 dystopia in the world than any other. And seeing a liberation of North Korea would be a beautiful thing, to actually see North and South Korea reunite, because there's family that's across borders. And you can imagine South Korea is one of the most prosperous countries in the world, while I can only guess that North Korea, they don't really share their information. So having actual statistics and facts are quite hard to come by. You can only imagine by the people suffering, and they commit nuclear tests within their country and all kinds of crazy prison camps, and millions of people die. I think 2 million or something like that have died during cell phone during Rocketman's reign, and I think 50 million during his father's, and then we had his grandfather. You know, it's insane, but we'll see what the future will take us. But this is where I'll get off.